Hi everyone, welcome to my third Goodnotes tip video on how to use the iPad Pro pencil in Goodnotes as a UX designer. In the previous two videos, we looked at setting up templates, setting up your folder system, auto backup, and your tools. In this video, I'm going to give you 8 tricks for how to work better as you're sketching and taking notes in Goodnotes. So I think most of us starting to use our iPad Pro and pencil kind of came at it from a perspective of paper. You have a piece of paper, you start writing on it, and that's all well and good. That's a decent way of thinking about using your iPad and pencil. However, you're really not going to get as much out of it as you could if you thought a little bit differently. So instead of thinking about this as pen and paper, start thinking about it as a design tool. If you're not familiar with design tools, maybe think about it as PowerPoint or any application where you can quickly and easily manipulate the layout and appearance of objects after you put them into the file. For example, instead of just writing something out and picking the tool to set the line weight, I might instead grab this lasso tool, select some text that I intentionally wrote fairly small, hit resize, and now I have a heading that's bolder than any pen that I could actually do. Goodnotes also allows you to recolor things, so I can pick what color I want this text to be after the fact. Let me make this blue or pink. And finally, I can grab stuff and rearrange it. So for example, if I wanted these bullets to be in a different order, I can quickly rearrange things on the fly. How this might look in practice is if I'm writing a bunch of notes here and say they add something else to their favorite things. Let's say whiskers on kittens. Often what I will do here is use kind of the right margin that's maybe not as full or anywhere else on the page that I have some empty space. And then when I have a moment in the meeting or during an interview, I can start moving things around to fit that item into the layout of the text. I will also, for example, I will also do my headings by intentionally writing things fairly small. So let's say that this was an interview from October 1st. Right now that doesn't look like much of a heading, but if I resize that, I can get a pretty thick line, and I can also control the alignment of the letters a little bit more easily than if I were writing really big. The reason I have called this the one trick to rule them all is that pretty much all of the other tricks that I have in this video are basically taking advantage of the fact that it's digital and kind of getting rid of the mental model of it's just pen on paper and it's permanent once I've finished writing. So let's move on to our tricks. So counting down from 8, trick number 8 is to mark your to-do items in your notes. The 2 ways that I go about doing this is I have a specific color, it's kind of this dark yellow, that if there's something that I need to do or an action item from a meeting or an interview that I need to follow up on, I will highlight it this yellow color. And then as I'm going back through my notes, I can quickly see the things that I need to do. And then once I've finished doing them, I erase that highlight. You'll notice that when I made the highlight, I go off to the side past the text a little bit so that it's really easy when my eraser is set to erase entire stroke. If that is set to on, I just have to kind of nick it on the side and I don't have to worry about going over my text. Another helpful thing for to-do items and follow-ups is to use kind of @mentions or hashtags. So if I wanted to, instead of highlighting this, write hashtag to-do. Goodnotes has a really robust search functionality that sadly they kind of hide under this options menu. So I can hit search. And let's say that I'm in a meeting with Claire here, and I want to see all of the things that I wanted to talk to her about throughout the week. So if I go in here and type @Claire and hit search, I can now see the 3 pages where I have written @Claire, and you can see it kind of highlights them there. So if I go to page 16. So I put that kind of in those notes there, and it's a really quick way of jumping between different notes. Trick number 7 is that I've found thicker pens to look better than really thin ones. Whether that is in handwriting, for some reason, the thinner pens seem to show a little bit more wobble. This might be personal preference, but that's something that I've found. Trick number 6, start with grid paper and then remove it when you're all done. So as I mentioned in the templates video, you can create your own paper or use the ones that Goodnotes comes with. And so when you're adding a new page, add page below, you can use a grid line to help align things, to help draw things, to write things on a straight line. And then to make it look a little bit cleaner once you're done, you can go in here and say more options, change paper template, and then just change it to the same size of a blank page. And then that just looks a little bit cleaner. Trick number 5 is don't start your pages from scratch. So if you're working on doing some wireframes or sketching and you're reusing any items at all on the page, duplicate the page rather than starting from scratch. To do that, you go into the thumbnail view, hit the edit, select the page that you want to duplicate or possibly more than one page, copy. Once that's done, go into the plus and then add that to the next page, paste copied pages. So now we've got a duplicate of that page, and now if I wanted to sketch on here, I could pretty easily kind of remove the content that I didn't want and not have to start from scratch. So now I have a new place to start. Related to that is trick number 4, making a little library of all the iconography or illustrations that you're using throughout making a diagram or a UI. So in this example, I've got maybe a person, a company, some arrows. When you're making arrows or things that have regular shapes, turning on this shape snap tool so that I can quickly draw something as wobbly as I want, and it will snap it to a line, or if I'm trying to make a circle. It's a helpful way to make just cleaner looking shapes. But usually I'll have kind of a first page that has a collection of all of these icons that I'm using throughout my diagram. And that way I can return to it and say I want to add another company, copy that. And now in my diagram, I can just paste that. You can also paste elements that are already on the page and recenter things or align them however you want. Trick number 3. Screenshots on your iPad are an amazing tool to work with. To take a screenshot, you need to hold down the home button at the bottom and the power button at the top for just a second and then let go. So if I do that on Goodnotes here, you'll notice I get a little thumbnail of it at the bottom. That will then save it to my camera roll and I can insert an image from there. The nice thing about this is that you can take a screenshot of any app that you're in, whether that's a chat or an email or maybe a website itself. So for example, let's say that I was designing for a website that maybe we wanted to look something like Etsy. I can take a screenshot of that, holding down the home button, holding down the power button. And now if I switch quickly to Goodnotes, I can click and hold that little thumbnail in the corner and now drop it into Goodnotes. Once it's in Goodnotes, I can draw on it, I can mark it up. Maybe I want to highlight this area, this thumbnail viewer, or note something that isn't working quite well, like the way that these images align. It's a pretty handy way to kind of work throughout the ecosystem. You can also crop in on screenshots, both in Goodnotes and by tapping on that little thumbnail. So if you select this image by kind of tapping and holding on it and hit edit, you get kind of into the edit mode and then you have to tap and hold it again to get crop. And now I could say remove this top browser Chrome, hit done, and now I have a little bit of a smaller image. Trick number 2. So I've noticed from using Goodnotes for a couple of years now that complex images tend to get really sluggish. However, in making this video, actually, I've kind of isolated it down to something more specific. So if you're doing a lot of illustrating that involves filling in objects and kind of scribbling back and forth, that's creating a fairly complex shape for Goodnotes to deal with. And if you have a lot of those, kind of too much for Goodnotes to handle, and things start getting very sluggish. So I'll kind of show you what I mean here. So this illustration at the very front, if I jump back to there, you'll notice how slowly it takes for this image to load, and then it loads in kind of sections. And if I want to add to this object, sometimes what happens is it seems like the pen disappeared and then reappeared and then disappears, and it kind of gets very difficult to work with. However, for the most part, simple shapes and writing doesn't tend to slug this down as much. So if you're doing a lot of diagramming, I would recommend avoiding using the highlighter to fill things in until the very end if you have to do it at all. And my trick number 1 is that Goodnotes screenshots are super amazing. So before we talked about iOS screenshots, which are really useful for capturing an image anywhere on your iPad. But if you're wanting to reuse something within Goodnotes, I highly recommend using Goodnotes screenshots. So I'll give you an example. Let's say that I'm doing a storyboard of an interaction flow. So in this example, I'm reusing similar elements. I actually made this third one by copying this and then pasting it. I'll kind of show you maybe down here. And then I wanted to layer up, I wanted to put a modal screen on top of that. So I kind of scribbled over this, added a border, and grayed out the background. But the problem with this is twofold. One, if you remember the last trick, these pages start to get very slow loading and start lagging as you're drawing. And 2, if you wanted to say change an element, so let's say that I wanted this button to be green now. If I erase that, you'll notice that quickly a bunch of things underneath it also disappeared. That's because Goodnotes doesn't have any concept of layers, which is kind of frustrating if you're doing more complex drawings. One option is to use a tool that's designed for that. One that I probably will do future videos on is Concepts. I like that one a lot. But if you're still trying to do something simple, another way to get around that is through Goodnotes screenshots. I'm going to take my lasso here, do the same thing that I just did of selecting the screen that I want to use as my base. But instead of coming in here and saying copy, I'm going to come in here and say take a screenshot. So what that did is it just turned that little selection into an image that I can then copy to my clipboard and paste somewhere else, either in this document or maybe on the same screen. Okay, that kind of looks like pretty much the same effect as this second one. But the nice thing about it is that now that it is an image instead, it doesn't have to think about rendering all of those little itty bitty strokes. It's just rendering one flat image, so it's a lot more performant. And when I'm erasing things on top of it, if I want to erase that, the eraser doesn't erase the image. So I can now erase things and draw on top of it without having to worry about that layer underneath. I can also change my lasso tool to ignore images, so I can grab things on top and move them around without having to worry about grabbing everything that's underneath. So using screenshots and images is a handy way to get some little bit of layering into Goodnotes and make it a little bit more performant. So that concludes my tips for sketching and taking notes in Goodnotes. This is my last planned video on tips for Goodnotes. If you have any other questions, tips, or suggestions, please leave a comment below. Otherwise, subscribe for other awesome upcoming videos. Thanks for watching.